Well, all right, here we are back again, and today we're talking about section 3.6, where we are learning how to translate non-standard categorical propositions into standard form. And of course, we remember the four standard form categorical propositions, the A, E, I, and O type statements that we talked about previously. All right, so we need to worry about the distinction between non-standard and standard form categorical propositions because, of course, and this is a good thing, most categorical propositions do not occur in standard form. In other words, we're not typically expressing ourselves only in terms of these four sentences. So if we're going to work with categorical propositions of different flavors and different varieties, we will have to translate them into standard form before we can do, for example, Venn diagrams or the square of opposition with them. And that's really what this section is all about. So, as we will see, there are going to be 10 main ways in which a categorical proposition may differ from standard form. And I'm saying here that we're going to look at additional examples of each just to indicate that your textbook, of course, has lots of good examples of these different varieties, and then I'm going to add to those here and hopefully explain how they work and how to recognize basically what type of standard form categorical proposition you might be dealing with. Now, I will say, just as a tip here, in preparation for the quickly upcoming first exam, I would definitely recommend that you have example sentences on your note sheet for this portion of the exam. Doing these translations is one of the more difficult tasks, I think, on the first exam. So you're going to want to have some good examples or models to follow for that. So as always, we're going to start with the easier examples and then work our way up to more difficult ones. And so here we can look at this sentence, some lights are bright. And of course, this sentence sounds perfectly grammatically correct, and it is, some lights are bright, but actually it's not in standard form. And the reason for that can be actually revealed if we were to attempt to switch the subject and predicate terms here, right? In other words, to do conversion, as we talked about previously. If you were to convert this sentence, you would end up with some bright are lights, and of course that would reveal that there's really a missing noun there in the predicate term. So the good news here is that this is easy to fix, right? We can say some lights are bright things, and what you want to do here is just pick some fairly generic noun to plug in there to the predicate term, and that will fix the problem. Already, though, you can notice that what we're not doing here today is we're not improving these sentences, at least from the standpoint of, say, an English instructor. The first sentence here on this slide is definitely to be preferred to the second one in almost every instance. However, again, as I said, the first sentence there is not in standard form. It's not, in this case, an I statement, because there needs to be a noun in the predicate term so that we can actually do things like convert the sentence and so on. All right. Now, we also have an example where we have non-standard verbs involved in a categorical proposition. So, for example, take the sentence, all thieves will rob you. Now, again, that might sound like a typical A statement. It does begin with the word all, but it isn't an A statement for the simple reason that it does not contain the word are, right? Every single standard form categorical proposition has to have the copula are or are not, but again, the word are has to be in there. And so what we're going to need to do when we see that a sentence is missing the word are is we'll have to shoehorn it in there, so to speak. So in this case, we can come up with, and by the way, I'm just leaning over here to push the a slide advance button, right? We can come up with all thieves are persons who will rob you. All thieves are people who will rob you. All thieves, I would even accept all thieves are robbers, okay? But you see, we need to make sure we have that word are in there so that we are actually dealing with an A-type statement. Also, sometimes we are dealing with what are called singular propositions. And when this happens, what we mean is one of the two categories that you would find in any categorical proposition, one of those two categories is a specific or a unique person, place, thing, or time, something unique. So, take, for example, the sentence, Everett is beautiful. All right, so we're obviously relating the city of Everett with the concept of beauty. And so we have these two things being related to one another, but of course we don't have a standard form categorical proposition. We see that the sentence doesn't begin with the words all, no, or some, for example. It also doesn't have the word are in it. Now, when you are dealing with a unique person, place, thing, or time, you're actually going to need to make use of a particular phrase here, and that phrase is identical to. So, in other words, here we would say all places identical to Everett are beautiful, but they're not just beautiful, right? They're beautiful places. So again, remember to put that noun in there in the predicate term. All right, so when your unique thing is a place, you will say all places identical to Everett are, whatever they are, beautiful places. Of course, there are other options here in terms of the type of thing we might be dealing with, and so we might be referring, for example, to a specific or a unique person, right? So here's an example of that. If I said George Clooney is a talented actor, right? I'm relating George Clooney to the concept of being a talented actor. And so then I would say all people identical to George Clooney are talented actors, right? For example, thing. So in the room I'm speaking to you from here, there is exactly one clock on the wall. And so I could say, and in fact this clock looks like it's not accurate, but I'll say it's inaccurate. So I could say, the clock in this room is inaccurate. So what we would say is, all things identical to the clock in this room are accurate things. Okay, so I know this is a strange way to phrase it, but there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that in a second. Let me give you one more example here in terms of time, a unique time. Let's say I said that yesterday the Mariners won. So you could say something like, all times identical to yesterday are times the Mariners won. All right. So you have to focus in on this phrase and exclusively utilize the phrase identical to. Just going back to the example here on the screen, right? If you said, instead of saying all places identical to Everett, if you said something like, all places similar to Everett are beautiful places. Well, that doesn't quite cut it, right? Because there might be more than one place that is similar to Everett, but perhaps some of those other places are not beautiful. The reason we use identical to is because it enables us to pluralize the subject term, right? We say all places, plural, identical to Everett. So linguistically or grammatically, we can pluralize the subject term without actually pluralizing it, right? Because we're still just talking about the one place. There is only one place identical to Everett. And so you want to stick with that phrase, identical to, here. All right, so there's the list of phrases that you will be making use of here. And we'll see this come up again down the road. I will give you a little warning here, though, sorry, I'll back that up. I just want to say, you don't want to go overboard with the identical to phrasing. It's a common thing when you're first getting used to doing these translations. Sometimes people will want to say identical to more than they need to, and so you want to avoid that. And I'll show you some examples of that. We'll look at that here later on. All right, back to this slide. So here I'm going to give you a slide that says, watch out for these words, obviously, right? And so it's a long list, and I just want to say that anytime you see one of these words that I'm about to show you, in the middle of the sentence, before you translate it, you put the word and anything that follows it at the beginning of the sentence and then translate. So we have words here such as when, where, what, whenever, wherever, whatever, if, only, the only, and unless. So what I'm saying is when you see any of these words in the middle of a sentence, before you translate it, you want to put that word and whatever follows it to the beginning and then think about translating it, okay? And I will just note here for you that here in 3.6, it might be on page 183 in your edition of the book, but at any rate, it will be there in this translation hints box at the end of 3.6, it says rule for A propositions. It also lists these words there as well. So you can find them there as well, but just copy them down here if you like from this slide. And so just to illustrate here, let me push this slide out of the way just to give you a quick example. So I might say the Mariners will win if they pitch well. And so what I'm telling you here is that before you would translate this sentence into standard form, you'd actually want to rephrase it here. So I'll actually go ahead and use a different color. Right, so what you want to do is before you would translate it, put that word to the beginning, and then you'll notice here again, everything that followed it went to the beginning with it. And so you're reorganizing this, and it's only once the statement is in this form with that key word on that slide at the beginning, that's when you can start to think about, well, how do I translate this into a standard form categorical proposition? Of course, this is an example of a conditional statement, and we'll come back to conditional statements here in a few minutes, but just want to give you that quick example.